The courthouse on Center Street never slept. Even at 9 in the morning, the air inside courtroom 14B felt stale, heavy with old arguments and newer regrets. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead, a sound so constant it faded into the background like a bad habit. Rows of wooden benches creaked as people shifted, coughed, waited. This was Manhattan Family Court, where marriages didn't end loudly. They ended quietly, with paperwork. At the respondent's table sat Ava Carter. She hadn't spoken in 3 hours. Not a word. Not a sigh. Not even a glance in the direction of the man who used to call her his future. Ava's hands rested neatly on top of one another, fingers relaxed, nails short and clean. She wore a charcoal gray dress that could have come from any department store in Midtown. No jewelry, no designer bag, nothing that hinted at wealth, ambition, or resistance. Her posture was straight but unassuming, as if she were waiting for a bus rather than watching her marriage be dismantled in public. Across the aisle, Marcus Hale looked nothing like a man who was about to lose his wife. He leaned back in his leather chair with the ease of someone accustomed to winning. His suit was custom, deep navy, sharp lines, Italian cut. A platinum watch glinted under the courtroom lights each time he checked the time, which he did often. Marcus smiled as his attorney spoke, a slow, confident smile that suggested this outcome had never been in doubt. Marcus Hale was a Black American tech entrepreneur, 36 years old, born and raised in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and now a darling of Wall Street. His company, Hale Dynamics, specialized in predictive market software, algorithms that moved money before most people even knew where it was going. Financial news channels called him visionary. Venture capitalists called him safe. His peers called him untouchable. Ava had once called him home. That had been before the silence. "Your Honor," Marcus's attorney said smoothly, standing to address the bench. His name was Leonard Brooks, a man known in New York legal circles for efficiency, not mercy. "My client has made every effort to resolve these proceedings amicably. Mrs. Hale has declined to contest any terms, declined to submit counteroffers, and has remained silent throughout today's hearing." Leonard paused, just long enough for the implication to settle. "We take that silence as consent." A few heads in the gallery turned toward Ava. She did not look up. Judge Raymond Hollis, a tired man in his late 50s with a thinning hairline and the posture of someone who had seen too many versions of the same story, peered over his glasses. He flipped through the file in front of him, pages thick with financial disclosures and asset summaries. "Mrs. Hale," he said, his voice neutral but firm, "do you understand the terms presented to you?" Ava didn't respond. The judge tried again. "You are waiving spousal support. You are relinquishing any claim to Hale Dynamics stock. You are accepting the transfer of the vehicle registered in your name, a 2019 Honda Civic, and the termination of the shared lease on the apartment in Long Island City." The words hung in the air. "Mrs. Hale," Judge Hollis said, leaning forward slightly, "do you understand that by remaining silent, this court will proceed under the assumption that you agree to these terms?" Ava's eyes were fixed on the table in front of her. The wood grain formed small, looping patterns. She followed them slowly, deliberately, as if memorizing the shape of something she would never see again. Then, after a long pause that made Marcus shift in his chair, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Marcus exhaled through his nose, a short laugh escaping before he could stop it. He leaned toward Leonard and whispered something that drew a smirk. "She knows when she's beat," Marcus muttered, not quietly enough. Leonard straightened his tie and slid the final documents toward the bench. "If there are no objections, Your Honor, we ask that the court finalize the settlement today." Judge Hollis lifted his stamp. The courtroom settled into a hush, the kind that came just before endings. "If there are no further," the sound of the back door slamming open cut through the room like a crack of thunder. Not a polite knock, not a quiet entrance, a slam. The heavy oak doors at the rear of the courtroom struck the wall with enough force to echo. Heads snapped around. Even Judge Hollis froze, his stamp hovering midair. A man stood in the doorway. He didn't rush in. He didn't apologize. He waited. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark charcoal suit that fit him like it had been tailored with intention rather than expense. His hair was silver at the temples, his face lined not with age but with authority. He carried no briefcase, no entourage, just a thin leather folder held loosely at his side. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Marcus turned fully in his chair, irritation flashing across his face. "What the hell is this?" he snapped. "This is a closed hearing." The bailiff didn't move. In fact, the bailiff was staring. The man in the doorway stepped forward, his shoes striking the marble floor with measured precision. Each step was unhurried, deliberate, the sound echoing softly in the quiet room. He walked down the center aisle as if he belonged there, not as a guest, not as an intruder, but as someone arriving late to a meeting that had already been decided without him. He stopped directly behind Ava. Without touching her, he placed one hand on the back of her chair. The gesture was subtle, protective, final. "I apologize for the interruption, Your Honor," the man said calmly. His voice was deep, steady, the kind of voice that didn't ask for attention because it assumed it already had it. "But it would be irresponsible of me not to speak before this court finalizes anything." Judge Hollis removed his glasses. His expression had shifted from annoyance to something closer to recognition. "And you are?" The man inclined his head slightly. "Isaiah Monroe." The name moved through the courtroom like a current. Leonard Brooks stiffened. Marcus frowned. "Monroe?" Marcus scoffed. "I don't know who you are, but this doesn't concern you." Isaiah finally looked at him. It wasn't a glare. It wasn't anger. It was assessment. "Mr. Hale," Isaiah said, almost conversationally, "you believe you're walking out of this courtroom with sole ownership of Hale Dynamics, correct?" Marcus blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Of course I am. That's what the paperwork says." Isaiah nodded slowly. "Interesting." He opened the folder. The soft sound of paper sliding against leather seemed impossibly loud. "Because according to the records I have," Isaiah continued, "you don't actually own the core technology your company is built on." Marcus laughed, sharp and incredulous. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Isaiah asked. He stepped around Ava's chair and placed a single document on Marcus's table. It slid across the polished surface and stopped inches from Marcus's hand. "Take a look," Isaiah said, "specifically at the ownership clause." Marcus hesitated, then grabbed the paper. His eyes moved quickly at first, then slower. The color drained from his face in stages. Leonard leaned in. "What is this?" he demanded. Isaiah checked his watch. "A licensing agreement. Filed 12 years ago. Renewed quietly every 3 years. Expired." He glanced at the second hand. 6 minutes ago." The courtroom was silent again, but this time the silence felt different. "Charged. Alive." Marcus swallowed. "This is fake." Isaiah's gaze shifted, not to Marcus, but to Ava. For the first time that morning, she moved. She lifted her head. The woman who looked back at Marcus was not broken. She was not confused. Her eyes were clear, steady, stripped of every illusion he had ever relied on. "No," Ava said quietly. "It isn't." Marcus stared at her, disbelief cracking through his confidence. "You don't even understand what that document means." Ava stood. When she did, something in the room shifted. The silence followed her, attentive now. "I understand it perfectly," she said. "Because I wrote it." Leonard Brooks stepped back as if the air had suddenly turned cold. Isaiah Monroe folded his hands behind his back. And for the first time since the proceedings began, Marcus Hale realized that Ava's silence hadn't been surrender. It had been timing. The courtroom didn't erupt the way Marcus expected it to. There was no shouting, no dramatic gasp from the gallery, no judge pounding a gavel to restore order. What happened was worse. People went quiet in a way that felt instinctive, like the room itself understood that the power had just shifted and everyone needed to choose which side of it they were standing on. Marcus stared at Ava as if she'd spoken in another language. His mouth opened, but the first sound that came out wasn't an argument. It was a strained laugh, thin, brittle, forced. "You wrote it," he repeated, tasting the words like they were poison. "Ava, stop. You're embarrassing yourself." Ava didn't react. She didn't blink fast. She didn't swallow nervously. She simply stood there, calm and still, as if the last 3 hours had been a warm-up and now the real hearing was finally beginning. Judge Hollis set his stamp down slowly. He didn't stamp anything. "Ms. Carter," he said carefully, leaning forward, "you're telling this court that you are the creator of the intellectual property at issue in this settlement?" Ava's voice remained low, steady. "Yes, Your Honor." Leonard Brooks cleared his throat, trying to reclaim oxygen in the room. "Your Honor, with respect, this is not the appropriate time for." "It's the only time," Isaiah Monroe said, cutting him off without raising his voice. Leonard turned his head, eyes narrowed in irritation. "You have no standing here, sir. This is a private matter between spouses." Isaiah's gaze didn't move from the bench. "It's not private when assets tied to regulated markets are involved. It's not private when a corporation's valuation depends on a claim of ownership that may not be legitimate. And it's certainly not private when one party has been misrepresented as irrelevant to the asset structure." Marcus pushed his chair back hard enough to scrape loudly. He stood, trying to use height and movement to regain dominance. It used to work. It always worked. In meetings, in negotiations, in rooms full of people waiting for him to be confident so they could feel safe. But the confidence didn't land the same here. "Ava," Marcus said, forcing warmth into his tone like he was speaking to a child who'd wandered into traffic. "If this is about revenge, you're doing it wrong. You're in court. You can't just make claims." Ava looked at him the way you look at someone who's still talking after they've already lost. "I'm not making claims," she said. "I'm clarifying facts." Leonard snatched the document off Marcus's table and scanned it, jaw tightening as he read. His eyes flicked up toward Isaiah. "Where did you get this?" Isaiah held the folder at his side. "From the records department of the bank that has processed Hale Dynamics principal transfers for the last 7 years. Leonard's face tightened. "That's absurd. No bank would." Isaiah finally looked at him. "I'm not a bank. I own the group that acquired the bank." A ripple moved through the gallery, soft, restrained, but unmistakable. Judge Hollis straightened. His tone changed, not dramatically, but subtly, like someone realizing they should choose their words with more care. "Mr. Monroe, are you saying you have a business relationship with Hale Dynamics?" Isaiah didn't smile. He didn't take pride in it. "I'm saying Hale Dynamics has used my institution's infrastructure. There's a difference." Marcus's throat bobbed as he swallowed. He glanced around as if expecting someone, anyone, to step in and laugh this off with him. Nobody did. The bailiff was watching Isaiah like he'd seen him on television. The court reporter's fingers paused, then resumed, typing faster. Marcus turned toward Ava again, voice dropping into something sharp. "You're not a programmer." Ava didn't flinch. "That's what you told people." He stopped himself, catching the word before it escaped. He'd almost said what he really believed. He'd almost said what he'd been saying for years behind her back. He swallowed it and tried again, cleaner. "You're a designer. You do layouts. You do branding. You do." "I did what I needed to do so you'd stop asking questions," Ava said. Her voice wasn't angry. That was the part that made it feel colder. Marcus's brows drew together. "What are you talking about?" Ava looked at Judge Hollis again, respectful, controlled. "Your Honor, my husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, has built his public identity around being a genius founder. That identity is tied to the company's value. If I had openly challenged it earlier, he would have buried me socially, legally, and financially before I could move anything into protection." Leonard barked a short laugh. "Protection? From what?" "From him," Ava said simply. Marcus's face hardened. This is insane. Is it? Isaiah asked quietly, and the question landed like weight. Judge Hollis held up a hand. All right, we're going to slow this down. Mr. Brooks, approach. Leonard hesitated, then stepped toward the bench. Marcus tried to follow. Mr. Hale, Judge Hollis said. Sit. Marcus's eyes flashed. In any other room, he would have ignored that. In any other room, he could have treated the judge as another person in the way of his schedule. But something about Isaiah's presence, about the sudden instability of the ground under him, made him hesitate. Marcus sat. Leonard leaned toward the bench, speaking in a low voice. Judge Hollis listened, brows furrowing, then glanced down at the document again. He motioned Isaiah forward. Mr. Monroe, the judge said, you're saying this licensing agreement exists and has been renewed multiple times? Yes, Isaiah replied. And it hasn't been renewed this time. Leonard's voice sharpened. He said, the license agreement is irrelevant to this divorce settlement. The settlement concerns marital assets. And a company built on leased code isn't an asset the way you're pretending it is, Isaiah said. Marcus's hands curled into fists under the table. You're trying to sabotage me. Isaiah's expression didn't change. No, I'm preventing you from walking out of here with something you don't own. Marcus's jaw tensed. I do own it. Ava turned to him slowly. Marcus. He looked at her with a mixture of rage and confusion, like he couldn't decide whether she was bluffing or betraying him. Ava's voice stayed calm. Do you remember the first apartment we lived in? Marcus blinked, thrown off. What does that have to do with anything? The one in Harlem, she continued, ignoring his question. The little place above the bakery. The radiator that sounded like it was arguing with itself all night. Marcus stared, like the memory was inconvenient. You used to come home late, Ava said. You'd throw your keys in the bowl and tell me about your day like you were narrating a movie. You'd talk about venture meetings, about the people you wanted to impress, about the interviews you were going to do once your software went live. Marcus's face tightened. Stop. You'd sit on the couch and tell me you were building the future, Ava continued. Then you'd fall asleep with your laptop open on your chest. And when you were asleep, I would get up. Isaiah remained behind her like a shadow, still and present. Ava's eyes didn't leave Marcus. I would sit at the kitchen table. I would open the code. I would rewrite everything that didn't work. Marcus's mouth opened, then closed. Because what you had, Ava said, was a concept, a pitch, a confidence problem. What you didn't have was a working system. Leonard scoffed. Your Honor, this is... Let her speak, Judge Hollis said. That sentence hit Marcus harder than Ava's confession. Because the judge wasn't treating Ava like an emotional wife anymore. He was treating her like a witness. Marcus leaned forward, voice low and venomous. You're lying. Ava tilted her head slightly. Then explain why every algorithm update Hale Dynamics has filed over the past 5 years was routed through an LLC you've never heard of. Marcus froze. Ava didn't stop. Explain why your chief engineer quit 2 years ago and wrote, in his exit interview, that he didn't want to be credited for work he didn't do. Marcus's eyes darted to Leonard. Leonard looked suddenly less sure of himself. Ava kept her tone even. Explain why the source control logs show commits happening at 3 in the morning from the IP address of our apartment, while you were posting photos from a private lounge in Soho. Marcus's face turned hot. That proves nothing. It proves everything, Ava said. Judge Hollis exhaled slowly and leaned back. Mr. Brooks, he said to Leonard, we're going to need a recess. Leonard's eyes widened. Your Honor, the settlement has already. It has not. Judge Hollis interrupted, tapping the papers in front of him. I haven't finalized it. And now I have reason to believe material facts may have been misrepresented. Marcus stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. The bailiff shifted, and Marcus noticed. That was the moment he felt it, the first real tremor of fear. Not panic, not yet, but the sense that the room was no longer his. Judge Hollis glanced at Ava. Ms. Carter, you've waived spousal support and claim to shares, yes? Ava nodded once. And you were prepared to let this settlement stand? The judge asked. Ava's answer was immediate. Yes. Marcus spun toward her. Then why are you doing this now? Ava's eyes stayed on him. Because you weren't going to walk away with nothing. Marcus's brow furrowed. What does that mean? Ava's voice softened just slightly, not with kindness, but with something like finality. You thought you were leaving me with a car and a lease. You were leaving with my work, my name, my mind. That's not nothing. Judge Hollis stood. Court is in recess for 15 minutes. Mr. Brooks, Mr. Hale, Miss Carter, remain. Counsel will meet in chambers. The gavel came down with a quick, sharp sound. Marcus stared at the judge like he'd been personally insulted. Then the bailiff stepped forward, and Marcus understood the instruction wasn't negotiable. People in the gallery whispered as they filed out. Ava remained still. Isaiah remained behind her. Marcus paced at the table, murmuring furiously to Leonard as Leonard tried to place calls and send messages with hands that now looked less steady than before. When the courtroom was nearly empty, Marcus leaned in close to Ava, dropping his voice. You planned this, he hissed. Ava didn't move. You planned to erase me. Marcus's face twisted. You think this makes you powerful? Ava finally looked up at him fully. No. Her eyes were calm, but they were not soft. This makes me free. Marcus's lips parted, ready to spit something cutting. Before he could, Isaiah spoke, quiet, almost casual. Mr. Hale, he said, do you know what happens when investors find out your company's core product is leased? Marcus snapped his head toward him. Stay out of this. Isaiah's voice didn't change. They don't just leave. They run. And they don't run politely. Leonard cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Monroe, if you're implying. I'm not implying, Isaiah said. I'm informing. Your client's valuation depends on a belief. And beliefs collapse faster than companies. Marcus's throat tightened. You're bluffing. Isaiah looked him over the way someone looks at a man arguing with gravity. I'm not. Ava's phone buzzed softly in her bag. She didn't reach for it right away. Silence again, strategic, controlled. Marcus noticed the buzz and smirked, grasping for anything that looked like weakness. Who's that? Your little friend? Your little support system? Ava waited 2 seconds longer than necessary, then pulled the phone out. One message. No name saved. Just a number. The text was short. Board meeting moved up. Emergency session. Investors already calling. Ava stared at it for a moment without expression. Marcus leaned forward, trying to see. What is that? Ava slid the phone back into her bag. You're about to find out, she said. Marcus's grin faltered. Ava, don't do this. Ava's eyes met his again. You did this. The side door to the judge's chambers opened. The clerk stepped out, looking tense. Counsel, the clerk said. Judge Hollis is ready. Leonard straightened, tugging his suit into place like armor. Marcus rolled his shoulders back. Ava remained composed. Isaiah moved with her, not touching her, but close enough that the entire courtroom could feel what his presence meant. As they walked toward chambers, Marcus hissed one last thing under his breath. You really think that man back there is on your side? Ava didn't answer immediately. She waited until they reached the chamber door. Then she spoke, softly, so only Marcus could hear. He's not on my side. She looked straight ahead. He's on the truth side. And you've been hiding from that your whole life. The chamber door closed behind them. Outside, in the hallway, a courthouse television mounted on the wall switched to a financial news channel. The anchor's voice rose with urgency as a headline flashed across the screen. Breaking. Hale Dynamics faces sudden IP ownership questions. Stock halt rumors circulate. Marcus didn't see it yet, but the building did. The city did. And somewhere, far above this courthouse, in glass offices overlooking Midtown, the people who had funded Marcus Hale's rise were already doing what powerful people do when they sense weakness. They were preparing to leave him, and they were deciding who would replace him. Inside the chamber, Judge Hollis sat behind his desk, expression hardening as he looked from Leonard to Ava to Isaiah. I'm going to ask a simple question, he said. and I need a simple answer." He looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Hale, do you own your company?" Marcus opened his mouth, and for the first time in his life, the answer wasn't something he could talk his way around. The judge's chambers were smaller than Marcus expected. No grand desk, no towering shelves, just a functional room that smelled faintly of old paper and black coffee. Power didn't need decoration here. It lived in decisions. Judge Hollis sat down first. He didn't invite anyone to sit. Marcus remained standing, jaw tight, hands clenched behind his back like he was trying to physically hold onto control. Leonard Brooks hovered beside him, already recalculating, already looking for exits that no longer existed. Ava stood opposite them, still quiet, still composed, still unreadable. Isaiah Monroe leaned against the wall near the door, arms folded loosely, posture relaxed in a way that only people who didn't need approval ever mastered. He wasn't here to argue. He was here to witness. Judge Hollis exhaled slowly and folded his hands. "This hearing was supposed to be routine," he said. "It is no longer routine." He looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Hale, you have built your case around sole ownership of Hale Dynamics. That ownership is now in question." Marcus forced a scoff. "Based on hearsay." Judge Hollis's eyes didn't move. "Based on documentation." Leonard stepped in quickly. "Your Honor, even if there were licensing arrangements in place, intellectual property created during the marriage doesn't belong to someone who didn't create it." The judge cut in. That sentence landed harder than any accusation. Marcus's chest tightened. "You're taking her word over mine?" Judge Hollis turned his gaze to Ava. "Ms. Carter, answer me plainly. Did you create the core algorithm used by Hale Dynamics?" Ava nodded once. "Yes." Leonard shook his head. "Then why did you never assert this claim before today?" Ava didn't look at him. She answered the judge. "Because asserting it earlier would have destroyed leverage." Marcus snapped. "Leverage for what?" Ava finally turned to him. Her voice was level. "For survival." The word lingered. Judge Hollis leaned back slightly. "Ms. Carter, did Mr. Hale know the algorithm was yours?" Ava paused. Just long enough. "No," she said. Marcus's mouth opened immediately. "There. You hear that? He didn't know. That matters." Isaiah spoke without shifting his posture. "It doesn't." Marcus turned sharply. "I didn't ask you." Isaiah's eyes stayed on the judge. "Intent doesn't override ownership, especially not in regulated markets." Judge Hollis nodded once, slowly. "Correct." Marcus's breathing changed. Shorter. Faster. Leonard tried again. "Your Honor, my client's company has operated publicly for years. Investors invest in structures," the judge said, "not illusions." He looked down at the file again, then back up. "Mr. Hale, answer this carefully. Did you ever sign an agreement acknowledging that the algorithm was licensed rather than owned?" Marcus hesitated, just a fraction of a second too long. Leonard's head snapped toward him. Marcus swallowed. "I signed a lot of documents." Judge Hollis's voice sharpened. That wasn't the question. Marcus's confidence, once effortless, now required effort to maintain. "I don't remember the specifics." Isaiah checked his watch. "You signed it at a notary office on West 34th Street. Tuesday afternoon. Rainy. You were late." Marcus's head jerked toward him. "How would you know that?" Isaiah didn't answer. He didn't need to. Judge Hollis closed the file. The sound was final. "Here's what's going to happen." Everyone stilled. "This court will not finalize the divorce settlement today. There are unresolved ownership issues that materially affect the division or non-division of assets." Leonard inhaled sharply. "Your Honor." And the judge continued. "I am ordering a temporary injunction preventing Mr. Hale from transferring, selling, or encumbering any assets related to Hale Dynamics until ownership is resolved." Marcus's voice broke through. "You can't do that." "I can," the judge replied. "And I just did." Silence followed. Heavy. Absolute. Marcus felt it then. Not panic. Something colder. Loss of momentum. Ava didn't react outwardly. No smile. No satisfaction. Just a quiet acceptance, as if this was always how it was meant to go. Judge Hollis stood. Miss Carter, you may leave. Marcus spun toward her. You're really going to walk away like this? Ava picked up her bag. I already did, she said. Isaiah opened the door for her. Marcus watched them leave, his mouth dry, his thoughts scrambling. Leonard, he whispered urgently, fix this. Leonard didn't answer right away. He was staring at his phone, at the notifications stacking faster than he could read them. Marcus noticed. What is it? Leonard looked up slowly. Trading halt. Marcus felt something drop in his stomach. Hail Dynamics stock, Leonard continued, voice lower now, has been paused pending review. Marcus laughed once. It came out wrong. That's temporary. Leonard didn't argue. Marcus looked past him, toward the door Ava had exited through. She thinks she won. Leonard finally spoke, carefully. This isn't a win or loss situation anymore. Marcus's jaw clenched. Then what is it? Leonard hesitated. It's containment. The word hit harder than Marcus expected. Outside the chambers, Ava walked down the hallway without rushing. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor. Isaiah walked beside her, silent. When they reached the elevator, Ava spoke quietly. They're going to come after me. Isaiah nodded. Yes. Ava looked ahead. Good. The elevator door slid open. Inside, a television mounted above the control panel flashed a headline. Market alert. Questions rise over Hale Dynamics IP ownership. Ava didn't look at it. The doors closed. Marcus Hale stood in a judge's chamber, surrounded by paperwork, lawyers, and consequences, staring at a phone that wouldn't stop vibrating. For the first time, no one was asking him what he thought, and that terrified him more than losing money ever could. By noon, the courthouse had emptied, but the consequences hadn't. Marcus Hale stepped out onto Center Street, squinting into the gray Manhattan daylight, like a man emerging from a tunnel he hadn't realized was collapsing behind him. His driver stood by the curb beside the black sedan, door already open, posture stiff with uncertainty. Usually, Marcus liked that moment, the small pause before getting in, the subtle acknowledgement of status. Today, he barely noticed it. Inside the car, the city noise faded, replaced by the low hum of the engine and the sharp vibration of his phone. Notifications stacked without rhythm. Emails, alerts, missed calls. Marcus scrolled once, then stopped. The headlines were already forming. Questions, not accusations yet. But questions were dangerous. Questions invited answers. Leonard Brooks slid into the seat beside him, shutting the door carefully, like sound itself might cause further damage. This isn't over, Marcus said, more to himself than to Leonard. Leonard didn't respond right away. He was reading. He always read first. The injunction holds, Leonard said finally. At least for now. Transfers are frozen. Accounts tied directly to Hale Dynamics are flagged. Marcus exhaled sharply. So we challenge it. Leonard nodded once. We try. Marcus leaned back, jaw tightening. She doesn't have the stomach for this. Leonard glanced at him. You don't know that anymore. Marcus didn't like that answer. Across town, Ava Carter stood at the edge of a quiet midtown sidewalk, watching pedestrians move past her without recognition. No cameras. No whispers. Just New York doing what it always did, ignoring individual disasters unless they were loud enough to interrupt traffic. Isaiah Monroe stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets, gaze steady on the street ahead. They'll start calling soon, Isaiah said. Ava nodded. I know. Investors. Board members. People who didn't know your name yesterday. Ava adjusted the strap of her bag. They don't need to know it. Isaiah glanced at her. They will. A black SUV idled across the street. Not flashy. Government issue dull. Ava clocked it immediately, not with fear, but recognition. Surveillance always had a posture. That car had it. They're watching, Ava said. Isaiah didn't look. Yes. They crossed the street together, blending into the foot traffic. Ava felt something unfamiliar settle into place. Not confidence, not relief, but alignment. The world was reacting exactly the way she'd expected it to. Slowly, cautiously, predictably. Back in Brooklyn, the glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor of Hale Dynamics was packed. Not with employees, with lawyers. Marcus stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up, tie discarded, hands pressed flat against the polished surface. The city skyline behind him looked distant, unreal. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. "A licensing technicality." A man in a gray suit across the table shook his head. "Technicalities don't freeze trading." A woman beside him spoke next. "The concern isn't ownership alone. It's disclosure. If you didn't disclose licensing risk." "I didn't know," Marcus snapped. The room went quiet. The woman's expression didn't change. "That's worse." Marcus straightened. "We can fix this. We renegotiate. We settle." "With who?" someone asked. Marcus hesitated. No one filled the silence for him. Later that evening, Ava stood alone in a high-rise apartment overlooking the Hudson. The place was spare, temporary. A couch, a table, floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting a city that didn't care who she was or what she'd done. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she answered. "Yes." A pause. "No," she said calmly. "I'm not interested in selling." Another pause. "You should speak to your compliance team," Ava continued. "They already know what's coming." She ended the call without waiting for a reply. Across town, Marcus sat in his office long after everyone else had left. The lights were dimmed automatically at 9. He hadn't moved. His phone lay face up on the desk, silent now. Not because there were no messages, but because the people who used to call him were waiting to see if it was safe. He stared at the city below, watching headlights stream like veins of light through the streets. For the first time, the silence didn't belong to Ava. It belonged to him, and it was only just beginning. By the third day, the call stopped pretending to be friendly. Marcus Hale sat alone in his office on the 42nd floor, the glass walls no longer feeling like a view, but like exposure. The city outside looked the same, but the tone had changed. New York didn't turn on people loudly. It simply stopped returning their calls. His phone vibrated once. A number he recognized immediately. The board. He answered without greeting. "Go ahead." The voice on the other end didn't waste time. "We're convening an emergency vote." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. "That's premature." "No," the voice replied. "It's overdue." Marcus straightened. "You can't remove me." A pause. Then, "We already have." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone as if it might argue back. It didn't. He set it down slowly, the weight of the moment pressing into his chest. Removal wasn't loud. There was no escort, no shouting. Just a quiet decision made in a room he wasn't invited into. Across the city, Ava Carter stood in a narrow hallway outside a private conference room, hands loosely folded, posture neutral. No assistant hovered. No entourage announced her arrival. The door opened, and a man stepped out, eyes sharp, expression measured. "They're ready for you," he said. Ava nodded once and stepped inside. The room was small, intentionally so. 6 people sat around a circular table. No nameplates. No introductions. Power didn't need labels. "We want clarity," one of them said. "Not emotion." Ava met his gaze. "Then we're aligned." Another voice spoke. "You understand that if we proceed, there's no reversal." "Yes," Ava said. "That's why I waited." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Evaluative. Finally, the first man nodded. "Then let's begin." Back at Hale Dynamics, Marcus packed his office himself. No one offered help. He moved deliberately, placing objects into a box he'd found in the supply room. A framed article. A branded mug. A photo he didn't remember taking. He paused at his desk drawer and pulled out a flash drive. For a moment, he considered it. Then he slid it back into the drawer and closed it. Some things didn't belong to him anymore. As he walked out of the building for the last time, the security guard at the front desk didn't look up. Marcus hesitated, waiting for acknowledgement that never came. Outside, the street swallowed him. Later that night, Ava stood alone on a balcony overlooking the city. Wind tugged lightly at her coat. Her phone buzzed once. A message. It's done. She didn't reply. She didn't smile. She simply stood there, watching the city continue on without asking her permission. Justice didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived with quiet doors closing. And one opening. The city adjusted faster than Marcus Hale expected. 2 weeks after the board vote, Hale Dynamics no longer used his name in internal documents. His portrait disappeared from the lobby wall without ceremony. The website updated quietly. No announcement, no explanation. Just a revised About page and a different signature at the bottom of investor emails. Marcus noticed it one morning while sitting alone in a rented apartment in Queens, scrolling through his phone with the sound off. He stared at the screen longer than necessary, waiting for anger to arrive. It didn't. What came instead was something thinner, emptier. He tried calling Leonard. Straight to voicemail. He tried another number. Then another. The pattern repeated until the phone felt heavier in his hand than it should have. Across the river, in a glass conference room overlooking the Hudson, Ava Carter signed a document with a simple black pen. No flourish. No hesitation. She slid it back across the table and stood. That's everything, she said. One of the men across from her nodded. Your work will be credited appropriately. Ava met his gaze. I'm not interested in credit. A pause. Then a faint smile of understanding. Of course, he said. Outside, the river moved steadily, indifferent to names and reputations. Ava stood for a moment longer than required, then turned and walked out without looking back. That evening, Marcus received one final message. Not from a lawyer. Not from the board. Not from Ava. It was a news alert. Former CEO Marcus Hale steps down amid ownership review. Former. Marcus set the phone down and leaned back against the wall. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. He realized then that no one was coming to argue with him. No one was coming to explain. No one needed his approval anymore. Across the city, Ava stood at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. People passed around her, unaware of who she was or what she'd just taken back. The signal turned, and she stepped forward with the crowd. No cameras followed her. No applause marked the moment. And that was exactly how she wanted it. Somewhere behind her, a life she no longer needed continued to fall apart. Slowly, methodically, without her participation. Justice didn't need witnesses. It only needed time.